My name is Allison Carter, and I am 29 years old, and on the night I got married, I stood at the cake table under a chandelier while a string quartet played a love song and the room applauded, and I felt more alone than I have ever felt in my life. The bakery had piped white roses onto 3 perfect tiers. The photographer crouched for the money shot. Daniel's mother dabbed happy tears, and in the 12 rows of seats marked Bride's Family, there was nothing but empty chairs and wilting aisle flowers. Not my mother, not my father, not my sister Vanessa, not even Naomi, the friend who had sworn she would stand next to me in every season of my life. The applause thinned into a nervous hush, as if everyone could hear the thud inside my chest. Daniel whispered that we had each other, and I nodded because the camera was on me, but when we pressed the knife into the frosting, my dress vibrated against my hip, and the screen of my phone flashed through the fabric like a lighthouse beam in fog. A text glowed at the top that said, "We need to talk now." Under it sat a stack of missed calls and voicemails, 47 calls and 19 messages, all from a number I did not recognize. For a heartbeat, I let myself believe that there was an emergency, that there was a reason good enough to explain 12 rows of absence, that somewhere a flat tire or a fever or a wrong turn could still be fixed. But the belief slid away as quickly as it came, because 1 week earlier, Vanessa had laughed into the phone and told me not to expect anyone to clear their schedules for my little event. And Naomi had smiled too hard and said she might be late, and my mother had said we would see, and my father had sent a single thumbs up that felt like a shrug. Before I tell you how the night unraveled and how I made sure the truth did not tell me where you are watching from, and if you have ever felt your own blood turn its back on you, and if you have stayed with me because what happened next is the part no one in my family expected me to survive. The quartet kept playing Sweet and Oblivious, and the room smelled like roses and champagne, and something burned at the edges, the sour bite of panic. I could feel eyes on me from every table, kind eyes from Daniel's aunts, curious eyes from coworkers, pitying eyes from people who thought they were hiding it. Pity is its own kind of cut. It tells you that everyone has done the math and decided you were not worth showing up for. I cut the first slice with a smile I did not feel and handed it to Daniel and heard the MC ask for the bride's family, and my stomach turned when silence answered back. Cameras clicked anyway. Someone laughed too loudly to cover the quiet. The florist's petals curled at the edges as if they were exhausted by pretending. I slid the phone from the hidden pocket in my dress and stared at the unknown number and the words, "We need to talk now," and I felt anger rise hot and sharp, pushing against the ache like a blade. For years, I had been the ordinary daughter, the easy daughter, the one who cleaned up and calmed down and said it was fine. In that moment, I understood that ordinary girls learn extraordinary skills when they are left standing alone in white satin. I tucked the phone away because I refused to give those empty chairs the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I lifted my chin and kissed my husband and thanked his family for clapping and promised myself that the message and the missed calls would not be another excuse, not another fog to hide inside, not another version of later. There are moments when your life splits into before and after, even if no one else notices. Mine happened with a knife in my hand and frosting on my fingers, and a text that said, "We need to talk now," and the after began with a vow I made to myself in the space between 2 camera flashes. I would find out why they did not come. I would gather the truth with both hands, and I would make sure that the next time my family said the word tradition, they would remember this night and the cost of choosing a different celebration over mine. Before I tell you how that night unraveled and how every empty chair became evidence of something much darker than simple neglect, I need to stop and ask you a question. Have you ever felt abandoned by the very people who were supposed to stand beside you? I do not mean a casual slight or a forgotten invitation. I mean the kind of abandonment that cuts into bone, the kind that makes you wonder if blood really means anything at all. If you have ever been through something like that, if you have ever stood in a room full of people smiling while the only faces you truly longed to see never walked through the door, then you know exactly how my chest felt that day, tight, hollow, like the oxygen had been stolen from the air. So before we go further, I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Maybe you are in New York or Texas or a small town in the Midwest like me. Maybe you are overseas. Maybe it is midnight where you are. I want you to write it down because I want you to know you are not alone. And if you have ever felt the sting of betrayal from your own family, say it, because saying it out loud is the first step toward refusing to let it define you. And if you have not yet subscribed, hit that button and stay with me, because the story I am about to tell you is not just about betrayal. It is about what you do when the people you love most in this world decide you are disposable. This is about finding justice when no one expects you to fight back. My name is Allison Carter, and by the time I walked into that ballroom in a wedding gown, I had already lived 29 years of being second place in my own family. If you want to understand why the sight of 12 empty rows cut so deep, you have to go back to my childhood in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio, where favoritism was not just a pattern, it was the air we breathed. My sister Vanessa was 2 years older, tall, confident, and with a voice that could command a room before she even turned 10. She was the golden child from the start, the daughter my parents held up at every barbecue, every Christmas party, every church gathering. When she played piano, the whole house stopped. When she won a debate trophy, Dad cleared a shelf in the living room to display it. When I brought home a drawing from art class, it went on the fridge for a week before being replaced by one of Vanessa's ribbons. By the time I was 12, the lines were already carved in stone. I still remember my 13th birthday. I had saved every flyer from the bookstore downtown, circling the novels I dreamed of owning. I loved reading because books let me slip into other lives where mothers hugged their daughters and fathers bragged about them. On that birthday, my parents handed me a wrapped package with polite smiles. Inside was a second-hand copy of a book I already owned. The corners bent a faint smell of mildew clinging to the pages. I looked over at Vanessa, who was handed the keys to a brand new bike worth $300, even though it was not her birthday. She squealed, they clapped, and I sat in the corner clutching a duplicate book like a consolation prize. That moment branded me in ways I did not admit until years later. It was not just gifts. It was the constant divide in opportunities. Vanessa was signed up for 8 years of piano lessons, chauffeured to recitals dressed in gowns that shimmered under stage lights. I was told music was too expensive for both of us, so I should be practical and help with dishes and laundry instead. When Vanessa wanted to join debate club, Mom rearranged her work schedule to drive her across town. When I asked to take an art class, Dad shook his head and said art would not put food on the table. The message was clear. Vanessa's dreams were worth investing and mine were not. There were nights I lay in bed listening to the muffled sound of applause drifting from the school auditorium down the street because my parents had gone to cheer Vanessa while I stayed home with a neighbor. I told myself it did not matter that I would build a life on my own terms, but the truth is, it mattered. It mattered every time Dad said Vanessa makes us proud and turned to me with a shrug. You are just ordinary Allison. It mattered every time Mom whispered, do not start trouble, just be easy when Vanessa mocked me for the clothes I wore. Through all of it, the only person who made me feel seen was Naomi. We met in middle school, two awkward girls clutching cafeteria trays and searching for a safe table. She laughed at my jokes, told me my sketches were beautiful, and swore she would always have my back. For years, I believed her. She was there the first time a boy broke my heart. She was there when I got my teaching certificate, bringing me flowers and telling me that ordinary girls like us deserved extraordinary endings. I did not know back then that loyalty can be temporary when weighed against proximity to power. I grew into adulthood with those early lessons pressed into my bones. While Vanessa became a corporate lawyer pulling in 5 times my salary, I accepted a position as an elementary school teacher making $42,000 a year. I loved my students the way their faces lit up when a story came alive or when they finally solved a math problem. In the classroom, I mattered. At family gatherings, I was the footnote. Vanessa walked in with designer bags my parents beamed. Relatives whispered praise. I arrived with a homemade pie. They nodded politely and shifted the conversation back to her. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday reinforced the hierarchy. Vanessa's achievements were trumpeted. Mine were tolerated, and yet somewhere deep inside, I held on to the hope that on the day I stood in white, the day every parent dreams of, they would finally set aside their bias and show up. I imagined Dad walking me down the aisle, Mom crying as she adjusted my veil, Vanessa squeezing my hand and whispering, "You deserve this." I told myself that weddings reset the scales, that no family could deny the gravity of that moment. That is why the empty chairs burned so fiercely. They were not just empty seats. They were decades of small dismissals solidified into one cruel absence. They were the second-hand book while Vanessa pedaled her new bike in circles around me. They were the missed recitals, the ignored art shows, the evenings alone, while the family applauded her. They were proof that my parents had never planned to be proud of me, not even for a day. When I say that my wedding betrayal did not begin on the day of the ceremony, I mean it started in those early years when favoritism became tradition. My story is not just about one evening gone wrong. It is about a lifetime of being told in 1,000 small ways that I did not matter as much as the golden child. That is the backstory behind every empty chair. That is the reason why the phone flashing with 47 missed calls was not a lifeline but another twist of the knife. It meant that even in their absence, they wanted to control the narrative. They wanted to tell me something on their terms. But for the first time, I was ready to listen on mine. By the time the wedding date was fixed on the calendar, I had already spent months convincing myself that my family's old patterns would break. I thought surely this milestone would force them to rise above favoritism. But the weeks leading up to the ceremony only sharpened every scar I carried. It began with the guest list. My fiancé, Daniel, and I had carefully prepared invitations, 48 on my side, 48 on his, to keep things balanced. When I handed the envelopes to Mom, she thumbed through them with a frown. "This seems excessive," she murmured, pulling Vanessa's aside. "You know your sister is planning her engagement party the same weekend." My heart sank. Vanessa had known my date for months. She had smiled thinly when I announced it over dinner. Now her engagement celebration landed precisely on my wedding day. When I confronted her, she shrugged. "Allison, I can't organize my entire life around you. Besides, Mom and Dad already promised to host mine at the country club. It's been booked for weeks." She said it with that tone, the one that implied her life carried more weight than mine ever would. I went home that night and cried in Daniel's arms. He rubbed my back and whispered, "We'll get through this. Even if they choose her, we'll have each other." But the doubt gnawed at me. Weddings are supposed to be a family's proudest moment. What if mine didn't even show? The signs kept piling up. When I asked Dad if he could walk me down the aisle, he hesitated. "You know, tradition is nice, but maybe Vanessa should have that honor when her day comes. It would be unfair if I walked you first." I blinked, speechless. "Unfair," I echoed. He cleared his throat. "I just think it would mean more for her." Naomi, my supposed best friend, began acting strangely too. She had agreed months earlier to be my maid of honor. We had gone dress shopping together, laughed over silly Pinterest boards, even rehearsed our dance. But 2 weeks before the wedding, she texted, "I don't think I can make it to all the rehearsals. Work is insane." I brushed it off until I saw her tagged in a photo with Vanessa at the country club sipping champagne and holding fabric swatches. My stomach twisted. Naomi was helping Vanessa plan her party. When I confronted her, she smiled weakly. "Allison, don't be upset. Vanessa just needed advice, and you know I'm good at this stuff. It doesn't mean I won't be there for you." But her eyes darted away, guilt flickering across her face. Every detail of my wedding seemed to unravel under their indifference. The necklace my grandmother left me, the one she had said should be worn by the first granddaughter to marry, suddenly vanished from my jewelry box. When I asked Mom, she said casually, "Oh, Vanessa wanted to borrow it for her engagement shoot. You'll get it back eventually." My hands shook. That necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was the one inheritance I clung to, the one thing that felt like mine. Daniel noticed my growing anxiety. "Forget them," he urged. "We'll make our own family. We'll fill that hall with friends who love us." But even as he spoke, my phone buzzed with another message from Vanessa. "Don't expect too much. Mom and Dad are obligated to attend mine. Yours is sweet, but theirs is bigger news." Each word was a knife. I had chosen a small chapel with seating for 120, decorated with wildflowers and fairy lights, something intimate and genuine. Vanessa's party was at the country club with a guest list of 200 live band and champagne towers. My parents poured money into her event while I struggled to pay florists from my teaching salary. The escalation reached its peak 3 days before the ceremony. I visited my parents' house to finalize logistics, only to find them in the backyard with Vanessa and Naomi tasting cake samples. Vanessa smirked when she saw me. "You're early," she said. "Mom." "Dad, tell Allison about the catering issue." Dad cleared his throat. "Honey, we won't be able to contribute to your reception. We've already committed funds to Vanessa's party. You'll have to manage with Daniel's side." I stared at them, disbelief pounding in my ears. "You're choosing her party over my wedding." Mom placed a hand on my arm as if gentleness could soften betrayal. "We love you, Allison, but Vanessa's engagement is a once-in-a-lifetime event." I laughed bitterly, and my wedding isn't. Vanessa's lips curled into a smug smile. "Don't be dramatic. People will show up for you, just not us." I stormed out, tears blurring my vision. Daniel's voice in my ear when I called him steady and reassuring. "We'll still stand at that altar, let them expose themselves." But the pain didn't end there. On the eve of the wedding, Naomi sent a text. "I'm sorry, Allison. I can't be in your bridal party. Vanessa really needs me." That was the final crack in the foundation. My best friend, my family, all of them had made their choice. When I closed my phone that night, staring at the empty space where the necklace once lay, I realized something I had ignored for years. They were not just careless. They were deliberate. They had never seen me as equal, and they never would. I promised myself as I zipped up my gown the next morning that if they chose absence, I would choose memory. Every empty chair would be recorded in my mind, not as shame, but as evidence. Evidence I would one day use to show the world what they had done. And so, when I walked into that ballroom filled with Daniel's friends, colleagues, and my handful of loyal students' parents, I did, so carrying not just flowers but a quiet fire. The escalation was complete. Their betrayal was no longer just suspicion. It was fact. The morning of my wedding should have been filled with laughter, with nervous excitement, with the comforting chaos of family bustling around me. Instead, it was quiet, too quiet. I sat in the bridal suite of the chapel, surrounded by pastel flowers and mirrors draped in soft light, and the silence pressed on me like a weight. The only sounds were the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional shuffle of Daniel's aunt, who had volunteered to check on me. My phone buzzed constantly, but not with the messages I longed for. 47 missed calls blinked on the screen, each one from numbers tied to my family. Not one of them said, "We're on our way," or "We're proud of you." The single text that did arrive made my stomach twist. "We need to talk now." I stared at it, hands trembling. Talk about what? Why now, as I prepared to walk down the aisle, my chest tightened as if the walls themselves were leaning in. When the music began and the guests rose, I gripped my bouquet tighter, willing my legs to move. Daniel stood at the altar, his smile steady, his eyes filled with a love that tried to shield me from what I already knew. As I stepped into the aisle, the truth slammed into me. Row after row of empty seats stretched out on the left side of the chapel. 12 rows reserved for my family, decorated with ribbons Mom had once promised to tie herself, stood untouched like a ghostly accusation. The absence was louder than any jeer could have been. Gasps rippled through the crowd, sympathetic eyes turning toward me. I kept walking, each step heavier than the last, forcing a smile that felt like glass about to crack. Daniel squeezed my hands when I reached him. "You're not alone," he whispered. His words steadied me, but the hollowness still burned. The ceremony moved forward, vows exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, but in the corner of my vision those empty seats burned like embers. Every photograph captured them, an unspoken scar across the happiest day of my life. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, cheers erupted from Daniel's side. My side stayed silent, save for a few kind-hearted friends and colleagues. At the reception, the wound deepened. We had planned a dance floor big enough for 100, yet it felt cavernous with only Daniel's relatives filling the space. I scanned the crowd, hoping, praying that maybe they would appear late, that maybe this had been a cruel misunderstanding. But as hours passed, hope withered. Instead, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Vanessa. "You should have picked another date. Don't expect us to apologize." I slipped away from the crowd, retreating into the hallway. My veil brushed against my shoulders as tears spilled, staining the lace. The necklace that should have been around my neck was missing, stolen from me days before, and now so was the presence of the people who had raised me. I was a bride, but I felt like an orphan. Daniel found me, his tie-loosened concern etched across his face. "Allison," he said softly, "come back inside. Don't let them take this from you." I shook my head. They already did. The rest of the evening blurred. Friends offered hugs. Daniel's mother toasted to me as if I were her own daughter, and his cousins dragged me onto the dance floor until I laughed through the ache. But inside, a storm brewed. The betrayal was no longer subtle favoritism, no longer whispered dismissals. It was public, undeniable, carved into photographs and memories I could never erase. Later that night, when the last guests left and Daniel and I collapsed into the honeymoon suite, I scrolled through my phone one last time. Photos of Vanessa's engagement party flooded social media, champagne fountains, glittering gowns, my necklace gleaming at her throat as she posed under chandeliers. My parents stood beside her, beaming glasses raised high. Naomi, the friend who had promised to stand next to me, clung to Vanessa's arm, her caption reading, "Celebrating the future, Mrs. Blake." Family first. The screen blurred through my tears. Family first. The words mocked me. My parents had chosen Vanessa. Naomi had chosen Vanessa, and I had been left to carry my vows alone. Daniel took the phone gently from my hand. "Enough," he said firmly. "Don't give them more of your night." But it wasn't just a night. It was a pattern, a lifetime of second place solidified in one devastating day. I lay awake long after Daniel slept, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with anger and clarity. For years, I had swallowed their favoritism, told myself love meant forgiveness, convinced myself that someday I would earn their pride. But as the moonlight cut across the room, I realized I had earned something else: proof. Proof of their cruelty, their neglect, their betrayal. Proof that could not be denied because everyone had seen it. The wedding was supposed to be the beginning of my life with Daniel, and it was. But it was also the end of my blind loyalty to people who had never been loyal to me. Their absence had carved out a hollow in my chest, but inside that hollow, a new resolve was forming. When dawn broke and light spilled across the room, I turned to Daniel and whispered, "They think this is over. But it's not. I won't let them rewrite this story. I'll gather everything they've done, and I'll show the world exactly who they are." Daniel studied my face for a long moment before nodding. "Then we'll do it together." That day, my family chose absence. But I chose memory, and I chose justice. The morning after the wedding, I expected to wake up with a soft haze of joy, the glow of a bride beginning her new life. Instead, I opened my eyes to the memory of empty chairs and the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. Daniel brewed coffee in the hotel suite, the aroma filling the air, but I barely tasted it. I scrolled through my phone, each swipe pulling me deeper into the wound. Photos of Vanessa's party filled my feed, her in a glittering silver gown, my grandmother's necklace draped around her throat, Naomi at her side with a glass of champagne. My parents stood behind them, smiling wider than I had ever seen them smile for me. The caption read, "A night to remember." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a clean break, but a jagged fracture, the kind that leaves splinters. For years, I had begged silently for their love, tolerated the favoritism, convinced myself that one day at the right milestone, they would see me as worthy. But that day had come and gone. They hadn't just missed my wedding, they had erased me from the family narrative. They had replaced my celebration with Vanessa's parading my inheritance as her accessory, stealing even the symbol of my grandmother's affection. I put the phone down with shaking hands. "They can't get away with this," I whispered. Daniel looked at me carefully. "What do you mean?" I met his eyes steady for the first time since the ceremony. "I mean, I'm done being the quiet one. They wanted to humiliate me in public, so I'll hold them accountable in public. I'll gather proof every slight, every theft, every betrayal. If they want to play cruel, I'll play smart." That was the turning point. My grief hardened into determination. The humiliation that had silenced me became fuel. I started small, pulling out old journals I'd kept since middle school. I had written everything in those pages, birthdays overshadowed by Vanessa gifts, stolen chores piled onto me while she was chauffeured to piano lessons. It wasn't just the wedding, it was a lifetime of evidence cataloged in ink and teenage tears. Next, I turned to photos. I dug through albums and digital folders, noting every time Vanessa wore things that weren't hers, every family event where I was missing or pushed to the edge of the frame. The contrast was stark, her in the center, me cropped or fading in the background. But the most damning piece was the necklace. That heirloom had been promised to me by Grandma herself, a woman who whispered before she passed. "This is for your wedding day, Allison, so you'll know I see you." Seeing it sparkle around Vanessa's neck in dozens of social media posts was the final straw. I saved every screenshot, every angle where the pendant caught the light. Proof that they had robbed me not only of their presence, but of a promise made by the one family member who ever believed in me. I contacted a lawyer I knew through one of my colleagues, a woman named Grace, who had helped a fellow teacher during a custody dispute. Over coffee, I laid out the story, the photos, the messages. She listened silently, her brow furrowed. When I finished, she tapped the necklace photo on my screen. "This piece has significant sentimental and financial value," she said. "If it was promised to you in a will and you can prove it, that's theft. And if they used family funds meant for you to finance Vanessa's event, that could open another case. Do you want to pursue this legally?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. For the first time, the word didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like justice. Grace leaned back. "Then start gathering everything. Messages, receipts, old letters. Build a timeline. We'll file when you're ready. And Allison, don't let them know what you're doing. People like this get arrogant when they think you're still powerless." I nodded, a spark of resolve flickering in my chest. That night, Daniel held me as I spread papers across our dining table. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I've never been more sure," I replied. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about stopping them from rewriting the story. They think I'll stay quiet, but I won't." Every late night after work, I pieced together the puzzle. Bank transfers showing Mom and Dad funneling money into Vanessa's event instead of mine. Screenshots of Naomi's betrayal, her texts pretending to be too busy, while photos showed her laughing with Vanessa. My journals filled gaps with context, each entry a breadcrumb leading to the wedding day. The more I uncovered, the stronger I felt. What once had been a fog of sadness cleared into sharp clarity. They had underestimated me, blinded by their devotion to Vanessa. They had left a trail, and I was following it. The final trigger came when Vanessa herself sent another text. "Don't embarrass yourself trying to drag us down. You'll only make yourself look pitiful." I stared at the message, my pulse steady. She thought she still controlled the narrative, but she didn't know I had already begun rewriting it. The wedding day had been their performance, their cruel dismissal, but the aftermath that would be mine. The turning point wasn't when they failed to show up. It was when I realized absence could speak louder than presence, and silence could be weaponized into evidence. They had handed me the story on a silver platter. All I had to do was finish it. The days after my meeting with Grace blurred into a steady rhythm of work by day and evidence by night. My classroom remained my sanctuary, the laughter of children reminding me why I had chosen teaching. But when the last bell rang and the hallways emptied, I went home, pulled out boxes, and transformed our dining table into a war room. Grace guided me step by step. "You need a clear timeline," she said during one late-night call. "Don't just throw accusations. Show dates, show proof, connect the dots. Make it impossible to deny." So I did. I created binders labeled by year 2005-2010, early favoritism, 2011-2016, escalations, 2017 to 2024, direct theft and betrayal. Inside each, I placed photographs, journal entries, receipts, and screenshots. The binders became weighty, each page a brick in the case I was building. Daniel watched me work, sometimes silent, sometimes offering a hand. One evening, he slid a flash drive across the table. "I pulled public records," he said. "Your parents withdrew $20,000 from a joint family account the same week Vanessa's venue deposit cleared. That's not coincidence." My chest tightened. They hadn't just chosen her party over my wedding, they had funded it with money partially meant for me. It was financial betrayal layered on top of emotional abandonment. I added the record to the binder, my determination solidifying. Meanwhile, Grace began drafting a legal strategy. "We'll file for theft of property regarding the necklace misappropriation of funds for the diverted money, and if you want defamation if they try to smear you publicly." I hesitated at that last part. Defamation. She nodded. "Vanessa's text calling you pitiful, Naomi's post framing you as jealous, it builds a narrative. We can argue they intentionally humiliated you." For the first time, I smiled. "Then let's include it." Preparation wasn't just legal, it was emotional too. I started therapy where I poured out decades of wounds I had buried under forced smiles. My therapist, Dr. Levin, gave me words I had never dared use: neglect, emotional abuse, scapegoating. Naming them was like breathing fresh air. In quiet moments, I wrote letters I never sent. Letters to my parents asking why my love had never been enough. Letters to Vanessa telling her she could keep their applause, but she could not keep my silence. Letters to Naomi asking if betrayal tasted as sweet as champagne. Each letter fueled me even if they remained tucked in my drawer. Daniel stood by me, his calm strength anchoring me when the weight threatened to crush me. "You're not doing this alone," he reminded me. Together we practiced what I would say if I had to face them in court or at a family gathering. He asked hard questions. What if they deny it? What if they cry until my answers grew sharper, stronger? Grace set the timeline. Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. They'll expect you to show up quietly, accept their version of events, maybe even apologize for being upset. Instead, you'll present the binders. Calmly, clearly in front of witnesses. If they erupt, we'll have grounds to file immediately. If they confess, even better. The thought made my stomach twist, but I nodded. Thanksgiving, then. In the final week, I rehearsed. I laid out the binders, the photos, the records, each tab marked with sticky notes. I practiced reading aloud in front of Daniel, holding my voice steady even as my hands trembled. One night, exhausted, I slumped into a chair. What if it backfires? What if they spin it and make me look like the bitter daughter ruining a holiday? Daniel knelt in front of me, took my hands. "Allison, they already made you the villain. But this time you'll have receipts. This time the truth will be louder than their lies." His faith rekindled mine. On the eve of Thanksgiving, I zipped the binders into a leather briefcase Grace had loaned me. I slipped the stolen necklace photos into the front pocket, the bank withdrawal record tucked safely behind. I stared at the case, my pulse quickening. For years, I had walked into family gatherings carrying pies, small tokens of love that were dismissed or forgotten. This year, I would walk in carrying evidence. It was no longer just about healing my own wound. It was about drawing a line, about showing them and myself that silence had ended. The preparation was complete. The stage was set. And as I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I whispered to the dark, "Tomorrow the truth walks with me." Thanksgiving dawned gray and cold, the kind of day when clouds hung low enough to touch the rooftops. Daniel drove while I sat in the passenger seat, my briefcase clutched like armor. Each mile toward my parents' house tightened the coil in my chest. This was not a holiday visit. It was a reckoning. The driveway overflowed with cars, a sure sign the entire family had gathered. Laughter drifted from inside as Daniel opened my door. I smoothed my coat, squared my shoulders, and carried the briefcase toward the front porch. My pulse thundered, but my steps were steady. When I walked in, the warmth of the house and the smell of roasted turkey enveloped me. For a fleeting moment, it felt like childhood before the favoritism, before the fractures. But then I saw Vanessa in the center of the living room wearing the necklace. My necklace. It glittered under the chandelier, catching every eye as if mocking me. Naomi stood beside her, pouring wine into her glass. The room fell into a hush as relatives noticed me. Mom forced a smile. "Allison, we weren't sure you'd come." "I wouldn't miss Thanksgiving," I said evenly. Daniel closed the door behind us. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's not spoil the evening. Sit, eat, and we'll talk later." But I didn't sit. I walked to the dining table, set the briefcase on the polished wood, and clicked it open. The sound was sharp, final. Pages rustled as I pulled out the binders and laid them in a neat row. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, her smirk faltering. "Evidence," I said. My voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of years. "Tonight, you'll hear the truth." A murmur spread through the room. My aunt leaned forward, curiosity in her eyes. My cousins exchanged uneasy glances. I opened the first binder. This is a record of how I was treated compared to Vanessa. Birthdays, ignored chores piled on me, gifts redirected. Here, I flipped to a page with a photograph of Vanessa at 14, wearing the dress Grandma had bought for me. It's all documented. Dad's face darkened. "Allison, this is unnecessary. We don't air family business at holidays." Family business. My laugh was bitter. "You made it public when you abandoned me on my wedding day." Every guest saw those empty seats. Gasps rippled. An uncle muttered they weren't at the wedding. I turned the page to a photograph of the chapel rows of empty chairs. This is what my wedding looked like. While I stood at the altar, you were here, I pulled out a screenshot of Vanessa's engagement party. Celebrating her, with my necklace around her neck. Vanessa crossed her arms, feigning innocence. It's just a piece of jewelry. You're overreacting. No, I said, sliding forward Grandma's handwritten note preserved from years ago for Allison on her wedding day. Gasps again. She left it for me. You stole it. Mom reached for the paper, but I snapped the binder shut. Don't touch it. Naomi finally spoke, her voice trembling. Allison, I didn't mean to hurt you. Vanessa asked for help, and I cut her off. You were supposed to be my maid of honor. Instead, you stood beside her. That wasn't help. That was betrayal. Daniel placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, grounding me. Grace had advised me to stay factual, so I moved to the next binder. Financial records. The week I was paying florists out of my salary, you withdrew $20,000 from the family account. I pointed at Dad. It went straight into Vanessa's venue deposit. He shifted uncomfortably. We thought it would benefit everyone. No, I interrupted. It benefited Vanessa. While my wedding was left half-funded, you gave her luxury. The room grew restless. Relatives whispered, their eyes darting between us. For the first time, the golden veneer around Vanessa began to crack. I reached for the final folder, and here, screenshots of texts and posts. Vanessa telling me not to expect an apology. Naomi calling me pitiful behind my back. Proof that you didn't just forget me, you tried to erase me. Vanessa slammed her glass onto the table. Enough. You've always been jealous. You couldn't stand that I'm the successful one, so you made this circus to drag me down. Her voice rose to a shriek, but mine stayed steady. Jealous. I didn't want your spotlight, Vanessa. I wanted a family, but you couldn't share even that, and now everyone can see the truth. The room erupted. My uncle demanded explanations. My cousins looked at Vanessa with disgust. Even my grandmother's sister, frail and soft-spoken, whispered that necklace was Allison's. Mom tried to gather control. This is still our family. We can talk privately. No, I said firmly. For once it won't be hidden. Tonight everyone sees who you really are. Silence fell. My parents looked cornered. Vanessa's face twisted with fury, Naomi pale and shaking. I pulled the necklace photo from the pocket and held it up. This is theft. Grace, my lawyer, already has copies of everything. If you don't return the necklace and repay the funds, we'll file charges first thing Monday. The words landed like thunder. For the first time, Dad looked afraid. Allison, let's be reasonable. Reasonable, I snapped. You abandoned me at my wedding. You funded her party with my share. You let her steal what Grandma left for me. Reason left a long time ago. Vanessa lunged forward, but Daniel stepped between us. His calm, unyielding presence held her back. Not tonight, he said firmly. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to look away. I won't be invisible anymore. Either you make it right or the world will know everything. For a moment, the room was frozen. Then Vanessa broke, her voice cracking. Fine. Take your stupid necklace. Take the money, you've ruined everything anyway. The confession hung in the air, undeniable. Naomi burst into tears and fled to the bathroom. My parents stood silent, shame etched into their faces. I gathered the binders, sliding them back into the briefcase. The weight felt lighter now, like chains breaking. This isn't about ruining anything, I said quietly. It's about truth. And the truth is, I deserved better. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out. Daniel followed, his hand warm in mine. Behind us, voices clashed, accusations, excuses, the sound of a perfect facade collapsing. As the cold night air hit my face, I exhaled for the first time in years. The confrontation was over. Justice had begun. The days after Thanksgiving felt strangely quiet, like the eye of a storm after the winds have ripped through everything. My phone buzzed non-stop, relatives sending messages of shock, some apologizing for staying silent, others confessing they had always noticed the favoritism but never dared to speak up. Screenshots of Vanessa's outburst had already circulated in the family group chat. The golden child image she had curated for years shattered in a single night. On Monday morning, Grace filed the necessary paperwork. Theft of property for the necklace. Misappropriation of funds from the joint account. a demand letter requesting repayment of the $20,000 within 30 days. She assured me we had a solid case Vanessa's own outburst counts as an admission, and the paper trail of the money is undeniable. News traveled fast in our town. By midweek, whispers reached Daniel's school where he worked as a coach, and even my own students' parents brought it up delicately at pickup time. "We're on your side," one mother told me quietly. "It's brave what you did." For once, the whispers weren't pity, they were respect. My parents tried calling, leaving voicemails filled with half-apologies and excuses. "We didn't realize how much it hurt you," Mom said in one. In another, Dad pleaded, "Think of the family name. Do we really need to involve courts?" But I didn't answer. I forwarded every voicemail to Grace. Their words weren't remorse, they were fear. Meanwhile, Vanessa's world began to crumble. Photos of her wearing my necklace vanished from her social media, but the damage was already done. Friends unfollowed her colleagues, whispered, and the law firm where she worked placed her on administrative leave, pending investigation into reputational concerns. Naomi tried to mend things too, sending me long messages about how she had been manipulated by Vanessa. But every time I read her words, I remembered her caption "Family First" and felt the knife twist again. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, we stood in a courtroom. The necklace, now locked in an evidence bag, glimmered under fluorescent lights. Vanessa sat with her attorney, her face pale, her bravado gone. My parents sat behind her, their eyes downcast. Grace presented everything Grandma's note, promising me the necklace, the bank records, the screenshots. The judge listened intently, flipping through the binders I had once assembled in my dining room. When it was Vanessa's turn, she faltered. She tried to frame it as a misunderstanding that the necklace had been shared, that the money had been a parental gift. But the judge's stern gaze cut through her excuses. Intentional or not, he said the evidence shows misappropriation and wrongful possession. His ruling was swift. The necklace was to be returned to me immediately. Vanessa was ordered to repay the $20,000 within 90 days, plus cover legal fees. Any further harassment or defamation would result in additional penalties. Walking out of that courtroom, the necklace in my hands, I felt something I hadn't in years: vindication. Grandma's promise had been restored not just symbolically, but legally. For once, the system had spoken on my behalf. The fallout spread quickly. Vanessa's suspension at her firm turned into termination. Naomi resigned from her job at a local event planning company after clients began questioning her integrity. My parents retreated into silence, their reputations in the community tarnished by the story. For the first time, they faced consequences they couldn't brush aside with excuses. As for me, I didn't gloat. The satisfaction wasn't in their downfall, but in reclaiming my voice. I wore the necklace one evening at a small dinner Daniel hosted with friends. They toasted to me, to courage, to truth. I touched the pendant at my throat, feeling Grandma close as if she were nodding in approval. Life didn't magically smooth out. Holidays remained complicated, and some relatives still begged me to reconcile for peace. But peace had never been mine to begin with. What I had now was something better: boundaries, and with those boundaries, healing finally began. One Saturday morning, I sat at my desk and opened a blank page on my laptop. Words poured out, not just my story, but reflections on favoritism, scapegoating, betrayal. I wrote for hours, tears falling freely until the piece stretched into an essay. I published it anonymously on a blog site, not expecting much. Within a week, it had over 10,000 views. Strangers commented, "This is my life too. Thank you for saying it out loud." Reading those words, I realized my fight hadn't been only for me. It was for everyone who had sat in an empty chair waiting for love that never came. Daniel hugged me from behind his chin, resting on my shoulder. "See, you turned pain into power," he whispered. And he was right. The resolution wasn't just legal documents and court rulings. It was reclaiming my narrative, refusing to stay invisible. It was walking through fire and coming out with scars that told a story worth sharing. The Thanksgiving confrontation had cracked the facade. The courtroom had finished the break. But what came after that was the true resolution. I was free. Winter settled over Ohio with a heavy quiet, the kind that blankets the streets in frost and softens even the harshest edges. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the silence. It no longer meant abandonment. It meant peace. The necklace rested safely in a velvet box on my dresser. Some mornings I opened it just to see the way it caught the light, a reminder that promises once broken could be restored. I didn't wear it every day, it was too precious for that, but on nights when Daniel and I sat by the fire sharing stories of our students or dreams for the future, I let the pendant rest against my skin. It reminded me of Grandma's whispered words of her faith that I would find my strength. Life began to feel like mine again. I started small redecorating the dining room that had once been buried under binders of evidence, painting the walls a calming shade of sage green, placing fresh flowers on the table each week. The space that had held years of pain now held quiet dinners and laughter with friends. My blog gained traction far beyond what I expected. Messages poured in from women in Texas, men in California, even grandparents in small towns across the Midwest. They all carried stories of betrayal, siblings, favored inheritances, stolen weddings, abandoned. Reading their words, I realized I had tapped into a wound that stretched far beyond my own family. Pain had made me feel isolated, but sharing it revealed a community of survivors. I responded to as many as I could, offering not just sympathy, but solidarity. One evening, Daniel found me typing late into the night. "You know," he said gently, "this could be more than a blog. You could turn it into a book or a support group. People need this." The idea scared me, but in a good way. For so long, I had been the invisible one, the quiet one. Now people wanted my voice. My parents remained distant. We exchanged no calls that Christmas, no cards in the mail. At first, the absence stung, but then I realized it was their choice, not my loss. Vanessa stripped of her job and her pedestal moved to another city. Naomi faded from my life entirely. The void they left wasn't emptiness, it was space. Space for new relationships, new traditions, new definitions of family. Daniel and I began hosting small gatherings with friends who had become like siblings to us. Our Thanksgiving table the following year was full, not with people tied by blood, but with people who showed up. There was laughter, gratitude, and no empty chairs. Sometimes I wondered if reconciliation would ever come with my parents. But I no longer chased it. Boundaries weren't walls. They were doors I controlled. If they ever chose to knock with genuine remorse, I would decide whether to open. Until then, my life moved forward without them. On a snowy evening in February, I walked through the park with Daniel. The air was sharp, our breath visible in the lamplight. He stopped, pulled something from his pocket, and dropped to one knee. "Allison," he said, voice steady and eyes shining. "We've been through storms no couple should face so soon. And still, I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me again this time, without the empty seats, without the shadows, just us, building our own family?" Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. "Yes," I whispered, my voice strong. The second wedding was nothing like the first. Small, intimate, filled only with people who loved us. Friends, colleagues, a few distant cousins who had quietly supported me all along. As I walked down the aisle, I saw no empty rows, only faces that mattered. When Daniel placed the ring on my finger, I felt the final chapter of the old story close. Not because justice had been served in a courtroom, but because I had written a new narrative, one where love was chosen, not demanded, where family was defined by presence, not titles. That night, as music played and we danced under strings of warm lights, I touched the necklace at my throat and whispered to myself, I am not invisible. I never was. The epilogue of my story wasn't just survival. It was reclamation. It was proof that dignity can be rebuilt, that betrayal can be turned into a foundation for strength. And above all, it was a reminder that sometimes the family you create is far more powerful than the one you are born into. If you've stayed with me until now, you already know this story wasn't just about a wedding or a necklace or even a courtroom. It was about something deeper, what it means when the people you love most decide you're expendable, and what it takes to stand back up when their betrayal threatens to define you. I used to believe that blood guaranteed loyalty, that family would always show up when it mattered most. But I learned the hardest truth: sometimes family doesn't. Sometimes the ones who should protect you are the very ones who abandon you. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can accept invisibility, or you can fight for your dignity. I chose to fight. Not with screaming or violence, but with truth, with evidence, with boundaries. And though it hurt, though I walked through fire, I came out whole, stronger, seen. So here's the moral I carry now. Family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who shows up, who stands with you when the seats are empty, who chooses you without conditions. Sometimes that means building your own table, filling it with people who bring love instead of judgment. If you've ever been abandoned, I want you to remember this. You are not alone and you are not powerless. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And one day, when you least expect it, you'll find yourself standing tall, no longer defined by what they took, but by what you reclaimed. Tell me in the comments if you've ever faced something similar. Where are you watching from? Share your city, your time, your story. And if this resonated with you, hit subscribe because there are more stories to tell, stories of betrayal, justice, and the kind of courage that can only come from survival.